Salvis Search for the Universe, Chapter 8.
Are you okay?
A young voice asked. Salvi's eyes flitted open. She leaned up on her elbows, or would have, if she had the strength. She looked side to side, still in the bathhouse, still the hot bath. Her body felt heavy.
You shouldn't stay that long in the hot bath.
The young servant boy rubbed his shoulders nervously.
I dragged you out. It might have been bad if I wasn't there, so please be more careful.
His life of servitude had obviously rubbed off on his personality.
Here, drink some water.
Salvi hinged open her jaw, and the young boy poured a stream of cold water into her mouth from an earthenware jug. It rushed down her throat and seemed to pump directly into her veins. She jumped to her feet.
Ah, you shouldn't move yet. Salvi, fine. Thanks, you human.
She was still dizzy, but it would probably go away eventually. It wasn't any worse than what she got from eating those razor leaves. He looked like he didn't believe her, but ultimately could not disagree with a paying guest. He took the picture, bowed, and left the room. It was funny to see a human doing that to her. She wouldn't mind if she got a lot more of that. Now, where was she? She stared at the bath again and considered getting back in spite of what had happened, but managed to resist the temptation. She was already clean and had work to do. It was about time she got out of this city. That brief moment of weakness in the bath, when she was tempted to give up on her quest altogether, it only made her realize how important finding Itty really was. Once she found that, she could build her own bath. What was that noise outside? Why were people screaming? It was distracting, so she tried to ignore it. First, she needed to find her clothes. She could live without clothes, but now that she knew those metal rectangles were money, she wasn't about to just let them go. She poked her head into the slot. She could only see a few feet down, then it was darkness. How did this thing work? Maybe there was some kind of mechanism inside. She leaned into the hole, felt around with her hands. Maybe it was deeper. She lifted herself onto her toes, pushing her head deeper, and felt her feet slip out from under her on the slick stone floor. Her legs went vertical and slipped from sight as the chute swallowed them whole. She banged and rattled down the narrow tube, falling head first into the darkness, then slammed into some kind of hinged flap. The metal lid banged like Armageddon and spat her out. She landed with a whoomp. Clothes spewed into the air like sea froth before floating down. Salvi popped her head out from the heap. Socks and underwear festooned her horns. Where was she? A row of servants stared at her, blank-faced. It was kind of hot, muggy, and hard to breathe. Smoke perfumed the air, and soot caked the servants' faces. She didn't like it down here very much. It reminded her too much of home. She sifted through the heap and found her clothes. It took some effort to put them on while she was inside the hamper. It involved a lot of twisting and rolling, but she managed it eventually and hopped onto the floor. The servants did not question her being there. It wasn't their place to do such a thing. They only stared at her curiously as she looked around the innards of the bathhouse. She saw a lot of humans shoveling things into the fires, and she was proud of herself for realizing that was why the baths were hot. There was horrible racket going on upstairs. Lots of thumping and raw, muffled voices whistling down the pipe. She wondered what was going on. Maybe it was normal for baths.
"How get out?"
she asked one of the servants. They pointed her down a corridor at the back, and she followed it until she came across a set of steps, light filtering in from beyond. The heavy metal gate groaned as she had to throw her whole weight against it to get it open. Finally she stepped into the afternoon light and breathed the cold air with a smile, and felt refreshed in both body and spirit. The gate spat her out somewhere around the back of the complex, strategically located so that no patrons would ever need to see the grimy faces of the laundry and boiler servants. Salvi was tempted to run about the streets again. She liked looking at the buildings, but reined in her desires. She had a quest, a duty. She couldn't spend her whole life in this city. And besides, as great as this city was, she had heard that Panes was even greater. She ran down the central lane and quickly went over the same walls she had come from and returned to the buildings that looked absolutely dingy in comparison. She had become quite accustomed to walking around the human world and hardly noticed the queer glances cast her way wherever she went. Now, how did she get out of here? Naturally, she got lost. In a stroke of brilliance, she decided that if she followed the walls, she would eventually find the exit. But the labyrinthian homes made even finding the walls difficult, let alone following them. She eventually got hungry somewhere along the way, completely abandoning her search for the exit, and used her newfound cash to buy some meat buns from a street vendor of dubious quality. It tasted like it was more cartilage than meat, but she was not that kind of race that cared much about such a thing. She swallowed the thick ball of impenetrable cartilage, bulging out her throat as it went down her gut. Having money sure made things a lot more convenient. The shopping district was completely different when you could buy things. It started with an angled hat. It was beige and spotted a colourful feather. It was intended for children, but it was the only hat that could fit on her head without getting stuck on her horns. Everything spiraled down after that, as she went in and out of shops, buying whatever caught her eye. She bought some small gemstone rings for her fingers, and 2 pair of rings for her horns, and 2 more gold chain necklaces to accent the broken one already around her neck. And after that she bought a gold bracelet intended for a human arm, but found it fit her tail perfectly. She bought an expensive mantle that draped to her hips, then decided she no longer liked the way the wind blew up her skirt, or how it got in the way whenever she tried to climb some walls. And she was shocked to find that someone was willing to tailor her a pair of trousers with a hole for her tail for the low price of her last gold imperial. It had only taken the man an hour to finish. She spun around and loved the way it hugged her limbs. Properly fitted clothing was still an alien concept to her. She didn't know what to do with the skirt, so she gave it to the man and walked out of the store. The sky was starting to change color, and she suddenly got another craving for alcohol. She ran up to another tavern, reached into her coin purse and found nothing. She dug deeper and only found fabric. It was completely empty. When had that happened? Oh, right, when she bought all that jewellery. Over the course of the day, she had been fleeced by a dozen merchants who had smelled her smelled innocence, like sharks smelled blood, and charged her 2 to 3 times the actual market value, conveniently ignoring exchange rates as well. But in Salvi's eyes, bedecked in jewellery, nearing the realms of tastelessness, it was a good trade. She gave up on the tavern, and with nothing left to spend, she remembered what she was trying to do in the first place. She took one step, and a smear of garish colours suddenly whisked past her face. It grunted. Bells tinkled. She flicked her head to see a man wearing an outrageously absurd outfit, with his face in the dirt and his hind end in the air. She looked just in time to see a lute soar through the air and strike him in the rear, belting a sour chord on impact, as if by the ghost of comedy itself. His feet slipped and his body fell flat. Salvi gripped her stomach. There probably wasn't a single intelligent life form on the planet that could resist doubling over in laughter after seeing such a thing, and Salvi was certainly no exception. She was already doubling up with laughter when she suddenly realized something. "Brandlecup!" she exclaimed. "It's Brandlecuff!" He stood and slapped the dust from his clothes. "Insufferable cretins!" he grumbled, fixing the door with his supercilious glare before picking up his lute. "Shocked to meet you again. Utterly shocked." He looked at her. Everything.
You certainly seem to have been doing well for yourself. Alas, how wondrous it would be if yours truly could claim the same. Salvi leaves city. What a coincidence.
He gave the door another sidelong glance.
I was thinking the same thing. It's about time I get away from this place and its pigs, I feel. If I spend too much time in this dump, I'm afraid their poor taste will surely infect me. Would have left yesterday, my dear cold-blooded creature, but the damned city gates were closed off. Quite honestly, who do they think they are? They cannot trap us like rats. What indignity! Gates closed? No. They are open today. I checked. Seems they couldn't afford to keep it closed forever, in spite of whatever commotions got them all in a titsy. But when I went and saw them stick their bloody hands up some poor lad's arsehole before they were allowed to leave, and I'll be damned if I go through that. Up arse?
Her eyes screwed cross. Try as he might, not knowing about smuggling or its tactics, she could not produce any reasonable explanation that would warrant such a draconian invasion of another's netters. And she knew well enough that she didn't want any humans fishing around where they didn't belong.
Yeah?
The look on her face was obvious enough.
Downright ludicrous, isn't not? Seeing that made me consider staying a few more nights until whatever end of days these boys are prepared for blows over. But
his wheezy sigh did not seem to match the equipment between his legs.
Truly, I've had enough of this horrid sty. It's time for this mistrial to move on to greener pastures.
Humans were smart, so he probably knew the way out.
Salvi come with?
He crossed his ribboned arms.
It could not hurt to have a travelling companion.
And I suppose I do owe you for
accompanying me in my time of weakness. But
she wiggled her fingers and thrust them into the air. It was obvious what that gesture meant.
Oh, no. They will not do that to me. If they so much as move 1 inch towards this mistral's precious derriere, I will simply tell them who they are dealing with. Such lowly gods would not dare do such a thing to nobility. What about Salvi?
She protested worriedly. Not only was she worried about that, but she just remembered she did not have any money to pay the exit fee they would definitely charge her. He looked at her appraisingly and shrugged.
I'm sorry, but you'll just have to bear with it. It cannot be that bad. I heard that some in the countries to the west put things up there for fun. Godless heathens.
He cursed quietly in the same breath. Salvi crossed arms and huffed.
Oh, do not be so petulant, little missy. No one is forcing you to leave with me. I'm sure in a few days this ridiculous situation will have settled down and you may exit unassaulted. Until then, ta-ta and farewell.
He turned and left. She couldn't accept this. She had to get to Panes, and she didn't even have any money left to spend. She ran up behind him and jumped onto his back.
Hey! What are you?
He squirmed.
Stop it! Oh! What makes you think you can... Oh, hey!
Stress and strain combined to drench him with sweat. How was this possible? How? Bandar ran with his soldiers. How had it escaped that bathhouse? All the servants claimed it was there up until the very second they showed up. The burning question ate at him, consumed him, but he could not know the answer. Determining that would take time, and that was something they did not have. It was always 2 steps ahead. Losing them there had put him back to square one, left them with no choice but to set up their central command and wait for information to trickle in from the street guards. They were everywhere, and the creature had showed no intention of remaining hidden, so it should only be moments before they got their first hits. But it was as if it just disappeared. He had wondered why it had never tried to hide itself, but now he knew why. It was a ghost, a shadow. It could evade them whenever it wanted. It had been over an hour before they heard the rumors of a kobold running up and down one of the shopping districts, leisurely buying things as if to taunt them. It seemed unfathomable that they would go undetected for so long in such a place. But Malco's group had just finished their sweep of the place, and they had just assumed it was secure. It was an inexcusable blunder, and their target had exploited it handsomely. Now they were chasing desperately after some phantom rumor that placed it somewhere down this street. He ran, his ears filled with the rhythmically clinking and clanking of metal, of his and his companions' uniforms. The buildings almost blurred in his vision. He was focused on only one thing, and Someone appeared out of an alley. He collided, sending both tumbling to the ground, their bodies tangled. He struggled to his feet.
You bastard!
Bandar roared.
Get out of my way! You have obstructed official city business!
The rest of the company stopped.
I'm so sorry.
The silver-eyed man quivered, pressing his forehead to the pavement in a deep, deep bow.
Bah!
He didn't have time for this. He scrambled up like a galloping horse and sprinted down the street, his company close behind as the man smirked and slinked into the shadows. He ran down street and alley. His vision tunneled. He gripped his heart. It was about to beat out of his chest. Running, running. Next turn, the street opened. There he was.
You there!
He shouted.
Stop!
The man turned, shocked. His bells tingled as he did. He was dressed head to toe in a puffy, ribboned suit, like he had taken the idea of a mistral's outfit and elevated it to the absolute extremes. He seemed to be a little fat around the middle.
What? Why are you stopping me?
He asked, his voice swaying, with a subtle tone of condescension, as if he thought himself of some kind of nobleman. It set Bandar on edge.
Have you seen a kobold recently? Recently? We have reports claiming you were speaking to a kobold that we are trying to catch. Do you know anything? Speaking? Is that what it looked like? Don't give me that shit!
He grabbed the foppish mistral's suit.
This is a match of life and death! Tell me! Get your hands off me, you brute!
The mistral slapped his hands away.
Is this how this city treats its guests?
He scoffed.
What an absolute dump! Honestly, do you even know who I am?
Bandar shoved down his rage, shoved down his panic. He spoke, slow, calm, and deliberately, but he could not hide his desperation.
We are looking for a kobold. Would you please tell us anything you know?
The mistral peered at him through scrutinizing eyes and sighed, as if he had no choice but to speak to such an inferior life form after that heartfelt plea.
Yes. I met it perhaps 10 minutes ago, but truthfully I did not pay it much heed. Too much in my head, composing new songs, you see? It went that way, I think.
He pointed in a random direction. Bandar swallowed his own screams, his eyes hollow. This was hopeless. He was outclassed and outmatched.
Pray tell me, why are you...
The mistral began, but Bandar was already running off in the direction of his finger. The company left in a cloud of dust. Hopeless. Hopeless. It was utterly hopeless. If it could evade him that easily, showing itself in the open, taking leisurely baths, and shopping as if it was completely innocent, what would happen if it actually tried to stay hidden? By the time it decided to sneak out of the city, it would be days before he even found a hint. For all he knew, it could be outside right now. He ran and ran as time wore him down. Alley after alley, street after street. An hour passed, then 3, then 5. The creature left no trace. It was done playing games with him, and now it was gone. He slowed and stopped.
Sir? Meet me at Fowler Square. I need to relieve myself.
He jogged the other way and was never seen again. Brandlcoff walked nonchalantly towards the gate, trying his best to keep a straight face. How had he gotten himself tangled up in this mess. He had nearly pissed himself when the crazed soldier started screaming in his face. His breath stank too, but that was usual for a great unwashed. He leaned into his suit and spoke down his collar.
"You didn't steal that jewelry, did you?"
No, no!
A familiar voice protested from inside his shirt.
Salvi never steal. Salvi use real money. It's truth.
"Well, then why are they after you? You're not about to tell me they were after some other kobold that just happened to walk down the same street, are you? You better not."
Salvi don't know. Salvi do nothing wrong.
Okay. I get it. Just quiet down, or we will be found out.
There was a pause. Then she whispered,
Salvi do nothing wrong.
Right.
Somehow he doubted that. He considered turning her in, but what was he supposed to do? Stand there and say, "As a matter of fact, I do know where to find this kobold you're looking for. It turns out they are inside my shirt at this very moment. Would you like to see?" No, of course he couldn't say that. What had she done anyway? But he couldn't imagine her doing anything particularly shocking. But he had lost all confidence in his ability to judge people after that failed assassination attempt during his childhood. He shivered. He didn't like to remember that. As it stood right now, he couldn't tell if he was some sort of hostage or just an idiot getting peer-pressured into making an incredibly poor decision. In his defense, he did try everything to separate the kobold from his midsection, but she had proven herself bound and determined to stay attached, to the point of nearly ripping his skin, so he really had no choice. Unless he wanted to go through the rest of his life with a kobold attached to his waist. That certainly would spice up the bedroom. For what it was worth, he was impressed at how efficiently she could hide inside his suit. He wouldn't have thought it possible, but apparently he hadn't met enough kobolds. Though he did not like the way it made his girth appear awfully generous. The only part that looked unnatural was her head, but he had solved that by hiding it behind his lute. However, that was not to say it was comfortable. Oh Lord, no. It was not comfortable at all. Her claws dug into his stomach, and her feet laced dangerously close to his family jewels. She had to keep her head sideways, and the horns of hers kept grinding into his shoulder whenever he walked. He would consider himself lucky if he got out of this without being accidentally disemboweled.
We're approaching the gate. Just don't say anything and we might get through,
he whispered harshly. He was halfway expecting her to scream, "Okay," like some sort of poor comedy skit, but he was pleasantly surprised when she showed the patience of mind to simply nod instead. That feeling was short-lived when her horn stabbed him in the shoulder 3 or 4 times.
Good evening, gents.
He gritted his teeth awkwardly, his face taut and red. Stifling the urge to bark in pain had taken tremendous effort. "Stop there!" one of the dozen or so guards commanded.
"The whole city's under high watch. We're not allowing citizens to leave. If you're a traveller, you'd better have a damn good reason."
The guard had a nose of aggressivity to his personality. The guardhouse was not exactly buzzing with activity, for most of them seemed to only be concerned with looking imposing. But there were a lot of guards. There couldn't have been less than 15, and who knew how many were inside the guardhouse at this very moment. The portcullis was raised, but was blocked down to one tight lane by wooden barricades and guard flesh.
"I don't want to be here anymore. Isn't that good enough of a reason?"
He cocked his hips. The guards were not amused. He scoffed in disgust.
"I'm a mistrial. My life is on the long, lonesome road. When my music calls me elsewhere, I simply must follow."
The guards looked at each other, as if they were considering between arresting him purely for assaulting their eyes and ears, or throwing him out of the city just to get rid of him. Eventually they had apparently decided on the latter.
"If you want to leave, you need to be searched."
The guard crossed his arms.
"And when I say searched, I mean everywhere. So, if you don't want to drop those fancy pants of yours, I suggest you turn around." "No, you will not,"
he protested, haughty.
"I simply will not allow you commoners to tarnish my dignity with such vulgar things. You're going to let me through without all that dreadful fuss and bother, and that's that."
They all frowned. 3 more guards approached. They started to get that ruffled peak in their eyes that most commoners get when you remind them of their place. Not that he hated commoners or anything. They were just so common. They sized him up on all sides.
"What are you doing?"
He backed away.
"Get away from me, you brute! Do you have any idea who I am?" "Can't say I do. Can't say I can either."
He gasped.
"How dare you! I'm Felix von Kinehorn, the rightful heir to House Kinehorn, and I demand that you let me pass unmolested."
They stopped, backing off instantly. That was a reaction he liked to see. Even though he kept his true identity hidden most of the time, it was always gratifying to see people give him the respect he deserved.
"Don't suppose you have any proof for that claim, your lordship?"
The guard replied sarcastically.
Sarcastically.
He made a disgruntled sound and dug into his pocket.
"Here! I simply cannot believe I have to show this to a commoner."
He thrust his signet ring into the guard's surprised hand. He rolled it in his fingers, gave up, and handed it to another guard, reclining on the sidelines, apparently much high-ranked with his red lacquered armor. He examined it from every angle, caressed, and even examined the hidden maker's mark, pressed into the innards of the ring. The punishment for counterfeiting the signet ring of a noble house was a fate worse than death. But even so, some were crazy enough to attempt it, but very, very few knew how to add that little secret. That god was certainly high up indeed.
It's legit,
the elite god announced.
If this thing were fake, I'd eat my left testicle, and then my right one for good measure. His face matches the portraits I've seen of the young lord too.
He passed it back, trying his best to hide his amusement, having compared the regal portraits he had seen with the fool in the motley uniform before him. How dare he? Brandlecoff quickly shook off his disgust and smirked as the guard with the bulbous nose returned his ring.
Well, you are who you say you are, your lordship.
No more sarcasm.
He liked that. But you're still going to need to be searched if you want to pass through this gate.
What?
He barked.
Have you got rocks in your head, you utterly unpleasant man? After hearing all that, you still won't let me through? You simply cannot do this to me. I must get through.
Terribly sorry, your lordship. But we're under strict orders not to let anyone through these gates unsearched, no matter how great or grand their position. We would be happy to escort you to Castle Farrell's and treat you as a guest until this whole situation blows over.
Absolutely not. I need to get through now.
The guards shared an uncomfortable glance and stepped shakily towards him.
If you absolutely need to get through, we'll try to make this quick and painless.
What? What? Unhand me this instant! I'll tell my father! My father will hear about this!
Wait,
the lead guard commanded, reluctantly leaving his reclined position. He beckoned the ugly guard to his side, wrapped his arms over his shoulder, and spoke quietly into his ear. It's probably best we let him go.
But the orders.
He stopped him with his hand. Before this whole situation blew up, Sir Tibbles was on his way for an envoy with Lord Kinehorn. Lord Farrell has been trying for the better part of a year to strike a deal with him over some river tariffs and metal transportation, and it was starting to look good for him before Tybalt was forced to return. The deal might still be salvageable once this whole thing blows over, but if we send back his son after sticking our fingers up his ass, you can bet the whole deal will explode in our faces. We might even lose our heads if this gets out.
But...
Let him pass, he ordered, slapped the guard on his shoulder, and went back to his position, reclining on the wayside. The first guard came back and bowed.
Please excuse our rudeness, your lordship. That was a terrible, terrible mistake on my part. Of course you will be let pass without receiving a cavity inspection.
Oh, of course.
Brandlecoff puffed out his chest. Never once had he been nervous. Of course the commoners would see the light.
If you please step this way, we will give you the lightest pat down, and you will be on your way.
He froze. He shook.
What?
It wasn't like he could outright refuse. If he had refused now, he would look even more suspicious. This had been a terrible, terrible mistake. How had he let that kobold force him into going through with this horrible plan? He stepped forwards, with legs so stiff they seemed to creak. Apparently Salvi was smart enough to know she was in trouble, because her whole body was shaking. But, in a way, she was depending on him. That poor little creature. He summoned his courage, stepped ahead confidently, and flinched at the sound of his back suddenly sneezing. The guards looked at him. He snapped into what he assumed was a natural sneeze pose a beat late, yawned, and scratched his nose. They squinted perplexedly, but otherwise didn't seem to notice. He was safe. The guard stepped in front, bent down to Brandlecoff's knees, and worked his way up, reaching the pockets, which were empty except for some coins. Then his belt, which only had a knife, and finally his waist. His heart dropped into his stomach as a guard squeezed Salvi's leg. He looked confused, squeezed some more, then worked his way up her thigh. A puzzled look on his face.
What is this?
His face grew pale. His mind raced. Think. Every lesson, everything he had learned in his 25 years of his life bounced about his skull as he grasped desperately for an explanation. It was...
That! Oh, that!
He laughed nervously.
That's just a Spalek suit my father gave me from the great sage mage of Aberdeen. It rarefies the Garshap energy, sluiced by the Lumi solar race, casting a lumbar barrier around the user, utilizing the astral firmament of the 17th plane of Underthunder, which protects the user from all unholy chthonic interference.
He breathed, chest heaving. The guard was absolutely bewildered. He kept squeezing idly at Salvi's thigh as his mind struggled to process what in the world he just heard.
Ah, please! Do not touch it any more than that! The coaxial overflow might turn your skin purple. Haven't you seen a Spalek suit?
The guard pulled back. He looked at his hand nervously. He tried his best to complete the search, but jerked back when he found Salvi's arm. Brandlecoff stared intently. He didn't need to act. He really was nervous, but fortunately the guard thought it was for his own safety. When his skin didn't turn purple, he let out a sigh of relief, and so did the guard. "You're free to go," was all the guard could say at the end of it. As absurd as the Spalek suit sounded, one could never be sure when it came to lords and wizards. And it did not feel like he was hiding a pendant. So, he was not who they were looking for. The idea that it had been a kobold wrapped around his waist, let alone the one they were looking for, was so far beyond any sane man's imagination, that even the most demented madman would have thought the idea was insane.
May you find much fortune in your travels, your lordship. Castle Farrells will welcome you with open arms should you ever wish to visit our great city again. Not likely.
Brandalcoff snorted, then sauntered under the portcullis. The wide green valley welcomed him with open arms. Fields and farms covered the rolling hills. He gave the guard outpost one last lingering look, then continued down the long, winding road. The moment it fell out of sight, he fell to his knees and wheezed. Keeping up that farce had made him queasy.
Well, we made it outside, you ridiculous creature. Now, get out of my suit before you scratch it even more than a witch's tit.
He grabbed it and shook the cloth like he was checking for spiders. Salvi tumbled out. That indefatigable smile she wore was irritating to look at after he had been forced to do all the work. She took a deep breath of the country air, taking in the freedom spread out before her with sparkling eyes. He was obscurely jealous, bitter and dour as he was. If all humans could be that happy by just looking at plants and trees, he thought, there probably wouldn't be any need for whores or dice halls.
Salvi almost scared,
She admitted cheerily.
You were almost scared? How do you think I feel?
He said in a huff.
I'm surprised you knew we were in danger to begin with. I didn't believe I let myself be dragged into such absurdity. Let it be known that Brandalcoff will never again fall for such tricks. Good day.
He walked away. Salvi followed.
Brandalcoff really smart.
He stopped.
Really?
She nodded emphatically. His chest puffed out, and his lips pursed with that subtle, and definitely not snobbish, noble pout.
Well, I suppose not just anyone could talk their way out of that situation as splendidly as I did.
He kept walking, and Salvi fell in behind.
Oh, you wish to follow the great minstrel Brandalcoff?
Salvi follow human.
Salvi always get lost. Very well, I will allow it.
He laughed, then paused again.
Where are you headed anyhow?
Panis.
That's weeks away. Certainly meant to stop somewhere in between.
Salvi crossed her arms, thought long and hard, and made a face that looked like she was in danger of bursting into flames from thinking too hard.
Klostervalk?
He guessed. There weren't many other options, unless she meant to stay at one of the several dozen villages that barely qualified to be put on the map.
Klostervalk.
She threw up her arms excitedly.
Salvi, remember! Both humans say go Klostervalk before go Panas. Klostervalk to Panas, eh?
He scratched his well-groomed chin.
Indeed, I cannot imagine a place more sophisticated than the capital. Perhaps there we'll be able to find some like-minded people
with an appreciation for true music.
He clasped his hands. It was decided.
Very well. You may accompany me to Panes.
Salvi grinned. Her missing teeth had already half returned, and followed Brannelkoff down the long road, between farms and beneath sleepy forest canopies. Her good cheer was only slightly damaged when he pulled out his lute and started to play a travelling song.